flight capital out of the euro. You're going to see the breakup of the euro as countries like Greece go back to the drachma so they can devalue and somehow try to save themselves. And eventually you'll...
And for that to happen, there'll be an overthrow of the Greek government.
Yeah, which wouldn't be a bad thing because this guy's a British agent, right? The Papandreou family are famous British agents in Greek history. Germany is dependent on exports and China, and I think Germany is going to get itself into quite a fix too. Germany is also quite highly indebted.
That's another question. Why is... I want you to get into what's going to happen, but Merkel is now calling them evil, wicked. She's using all these terms, insidious, deceptive bankers, but she still voted for it.
Right. That's the demagogy of the European leaders is that they should be attacking the banks and the hedge funds instead of attacking the people of Greece, and they lack the political courage to do it. In other words, this is a crisis caused by globalization. It's caused by Soros. It's caused by hot money, casino economy, derivatives, all the stuff that we know. It has nothing to do, really, with the fact that Greeks may retire at 50 or 60 or whenever they retire. Anyway, the breakdown, the chaotic collapse of the European currency, the euro, the chaotic collapse of the European Central Bank, a lot of these countries going into severe depression and social unrest. Then, kicking over, the chaotic panic runs on the British pound, plus then the connection is the euro-dollar market. When those banks go bankrupt in London, they'll start dumping euro-dollar assets. That may be the thing to sink the dollar. We always thought it would be China dumping the dollar or somebody else like this. I think it's likely to be the British. That would be true to form for them. And then, of course, when that happens, then you've got a dollar crisis in the U.S. I would think you've got to think about panic runs on the Federal Reserve.
But doesn't the dollar go up at first as Europe falls, and then about a week later or a month later it plunges?
Yes, right. I mean, right now we're in the fool's paradise phase where they say, oh, we saved the dollar by wrecking the euro. Too bad. It is one world economy, and this is going to bring down the dollar. Panic runs on the Federal Reserve. We had panic runs on the Federal Reserve New York branch in March of 1933, so much so that the New York branch had to borrow from the Chicago branch, and the Chicago branch didn't want to do it. Ultimately, I think you're going to see panic runs on the International Monetary Fund and the Bank for International Settlements. In other words, the destruction of all major institutions. And I think this, my view of it is that this stuff is not planned, and this is a chaotic breakdown.
But well, here's the problem. I agree with you. They're out of control, which is even more scary. Isn't the default position start a big war once that happens?
It's possible, yes. I guess we have to think about that too. In other words, the Anglo-Americans in particular have this penchant for when they get into a fix like that. One way you can freeze the markets, in other words, you can impose capital controls, exchange controls, and all the rest of it, is if you have a war, because then you have political cover for doing it. And that might be their way to do it. Much better to do it in advance. Do it now. Debt moratorium for Greece. Herbert Hoover in 1931 had the sense to freeze debt between the United States and Europe. He tried to stop the Depression. The French sabotaged him. This time the Germans are sabotaging. So we need debt moratorium, debt freeze for Greece, for Spain, Portugal, Ireland, Italy. Just tell them to stop paying their international debts, those governments. And then the other thing is freeze international payments on derivatives. We got 1.5 quadrillion of toxic derivatives.
You got to triage that.
Freeze them. Just freeze them.
Well, Webster, they're not going to do that, clearly. They're going to continue to...
No, again, if Herbert Hoover, of all people, right, the most hidebound, if he could say that Germany, Britain, France, and the United States are going to freeze all intergovernmental financial debt in 1931... anything is possible.
Do you think Merkel going after the banks, at least verbally?
I don't see Merkel. I see Sarkozy, because this is Sarkozy's demagogic position, is that he's the guy who's tough on the banks. And I see Berlusconi joining in, because Berlusconi will be bankrupt if he doesn't. Italy is not at the top of the list, but getting towards the top now. After Spain, Italy, for example.
All right. And time frames, weeks, months till we see this?
Normally, the timetable, this depression has been behaving pretty much like the last depression. So we had a year and a half between the first big crash and now the collapse of Europe. In 1931, the collapse of Europe took 6 months, from Austria, Germany to Britain. When Britain defaulted on gold in September 1931, that was the end of the European banking system. And then we had the third wave panic in the U.S., right, when every bank shut down between the end of 32 and the beginning of 33.
So we're talking about a 2.5, 3-year period?
I think this time, though, it seems to me that
Well, no, we're already 2 years in, so another year.
We're a year and a half more or less in, but I think this time the distance between the second wave, where we are now, we're in the beginning of the second wave, the distance between the second wave and the third wave is much less because we have derivatives and we have this euro-dollar market and we have a more integrated economy. The other thing that's fighting against that, though, is these huge bailouts, which we didn't have in 1931, which do tend to slow things down a little bit. So I would say at most, within 6 months, Europe will be completely collapsed, and then a panic run on U.S. banks within about, a year and a half from now.
All right, Webster.
Very